Good morning. I'm Imran Qureshi, Managing Director and Head of North America at WTW. And I serve as both a member of the board of the Executives Club of Chicago, as well as member of the Council of Advisors for the HERMAC Institute. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the final installment of We Rise Together series, continuing conversations on the significance of an equitable and just recovery for Chicago. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors for the season. Special thanks to the presenting sponsor of today's program, BMO Harris Bank. I would also like to thank our spotlight sponsors, Deloitte, Healthcare Services Corporation, Mesero, NiSource, and OCC. On today's conversation, I'm looking forward to the dynamic exchange with our panelists. I'm certain it will shed light on the payoffs and challenges of pooling resources to make Chicago a more equitable place to work, build, and start a business. I want to allow plenty of time for today's program, so without further ado, I'd like to pass things over to Tracy Morris, U.S. Chief HR and Inclusion Officer at BMO Harris Bank, to say a few words and introduce our speakers. Over to you, Tracy.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that introduction. And thank you to the Executive Club of Chicago for hosting this series, which is so important to us. I am the Chief HR Officer for BMO Harris Bank, and we are very excited about this series of creating an equitable and just recovery for Chicago. This topic resonates with our purpose statement to boldly grow the good in business and in life. We're committed to doing so by creating a thriving economy, sustainable future, as well as being inclusive in our work environment, as well as society as a whole. Our purpose is more than a statement. It is achieved through concrete actions. These actions are very helpful in the equity and just recovery of Chicago. We have a $5 billion investment that we call Empower. This eliminates racial and economic injustice for our customers as well as our communities. And this is done through lending, investing, giving, and engagement in our communities. There's another significant investment that we have, and that's through Mayor Lightfoot. It's called Invest, and that's our Southwest initiative for underserved communities, which is a $10 million investment through United Way. We have another investment that we've given to our society as well, and that's a $10 million investment in Rush BMO Institute for Health Equity. And this is important for all communities to receive the same health care that others receive. And this will increase life expectancy as well as help marginalized neighborhoods. These are just a few of our commitments to society, to small business owners, not-for-profits, and to all of our entrepreneurs as well. Now to expand to our wonderful guests and panelists today. So here to share how we connect together, which is very important to me, and I'm so glad to be a part of this. I'm going to introduce, starting first, Stephanie Hart, our Brown Sugar Bakery owner. Welcome. Julian Posada, President and CEO of Lift Up Enterprises. Welcome. Sarah Glavin, Head of Community Engagement at Amazon. Welcome. And leading us through these discussions today is Helen Gale, President and CEO of the Chicago Community Trust, and my Burnham Fellow alumni. So I'm very excited that you'll be leading us through these discussions today on equity and just. Now I'd like to introduce Gloria Costello, Director of We Rise Together. We want to recap everything that you're doing here as well as kick off this important session. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Tracy. We are inspired by the work that you are doing at BMO and the investments that you are making. Welcome to everyone joining us today. A special thank you to the Executives Club of Chicago for hosting this series and including today's capstone event. And thank you, Helene Gale, for leading this conversation with our panelists. We're looking forward to a great discussion. I'm going to take a few minutes to set context for today's discussion. We Rise Together for an Equitable and Just Recovery is a coalition of corporate and philanthropic funders and community working together to accelerate equity in the Chicago region's economic recovery. We launched in October of 2020, and we knew then and know now that we must act quickly and strategically to bend the curve of the recovery towards equity. To do so, we're focusing significant investments on long disinvested Black and Latinx communities whose success will benefit the entire region. We Rise is focused on three key strategies: spurring development in disinvested neighborhoods, increasing quality, resilient employment, and strengthening Black and Latinx owned businesses. We're about a year and a half into a 5-year initiative with strong momentum and big plans. We've granted about roughly $8.5 million to date, and that includes $14.3 million in 17 neighborhood anchor projects. So those 17 projects are valued at a total of $191 million, creating ripple effects in their communities. We anticipate approximately $40 million in total grant making in fiscal year 2022. With more than 150 gifts towards our 2022 fundraising goal of $100 million, that will help us continue to support transformative projects. And meeting our goals really could increase our grant making to these critical projects. Grant making at this scale and pace is possible for two reasons. We're pooling philanthropic dollars from a coalition of corporate and philanthropic funders, and we're targeting communities and projects already vetted by the communities we serve. We listen to, we believe in, and invest in Black and Latinx people in these communities. Community voices are priorities, and they're at the center of everything we do. For example, we're hosting ongoing community conversations to provide feedback on our approach and input into our priorities. We have active working groups of cross-sector partners in Lawndale, South Shore, and Greater Chatham. JP Morgan Chase, Meta, Navy Pier, and Comcast are among those bringing their expertise and resources to the cross-sector partnerships. And last month, we announced grants in our workforce portfolio that support organizations that will allow Chicago to get ahead of the anticipated federal recovery dollars. That means that we're kind of softening the ground before the big rain to ensure that Black and Latinx workers are prepared to take advantage of high-wage, high-growth employment opportunities. Before I hand it over to Helene, I want to share a story about one of our neighborhood anchor grant projects in Washington Heights. In August of 2021, We Rise provided a substantial grant to the Andaleo Institute for Development of Café Du Bois, near the 95th Street Red Line station in Washington Heights that has recently been renovated. The project will help satisfy a number of community needs, including a cafe and co-working space, a laundromat, pharmacy lockers, and office spaces. Melvin Thompson leads the Andaleo Institute and worked with the community for years to vet a vision for development along this part of the 95th Street corridor. COVID halted momentum, and We Rise, and together with our partners, helped them keep going. Melvin told us, people are excited about the renaissance we've been hoping for forever. And now neighbors are improving their own storefronts and sharing ideas for community programming. With this panel, you're going to hear more about what it takes to achieve this renaissance across our city and our region. I thank you for joining us today. And Helene, I look forward to a terrific discussion. Over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Gloria. And it continues to really be gratifying to see how you have taken what was an idea of how we can really focus on the issue of recovery with an equity lens, and you have made it a reality. And so thank you so much. and really look forward to the conversation that we're going to have. And what we would like to have our audience walk away with, first, understanding that this is all hands on deck moment. We have gone through an incredible period over the last couple of years. And, besides all of the health impact that COVID has impacted communities, clearly the economic impact of COVID, we all also know has been huge and has a long tail. And it particularly has a long tail for communities and households who are already economically fragile going into this pandemic. To have our biggest impact in the short term, we have to bend the curve of recovery. And we're best situated if we all pull together around a shared vision. And that's why we created the platform of We Rise Together. We want you to see the progress that's been made and hear directly from people who are involved in this, how it's made a difference for their work and how they're viewing this issue of equity here in the Chicago region. So without further ado, I'm going to lead our panel in a discussion for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to open it up for people to also ask questions. And we've run through our three panelists, each who have a different aspect of this to present. So let me just first start by asking each of you, from where you sit, Julian, with an organization that is really helping to facilitate economic growth and businesses, Stephanie as a business owner, and Sarah from a large multinational corporation. Talk about how you think economic recovery is actually going. And are we off to the right start? What are some of the challenges? So from your perspective, where are we? And maybe I'll just start with you, Stephanie. And I think you're still on mute, Stephanie.
Thank you. I think economic recovery initially got off to a rocky start, particularly for small businesses like myself. I think that rocky start then put a real highlight that we have not had in our community around what our needs are. And I have seen a response that honestly, I am pleased with how people in the community and outside of the community have put a highlight on how important the economic stability of businesses like mine are.
Julian, your thoughts on where we are?
Well, first, thank you for being on it. I am also encouraged on some level that I think that there is I think the COVID and or all of the infrastructure and supporting small business that was happening before was there, but now you see a greater sense of, as you said, Helene, it's got to be all hands on deck. It's not the small businesses are going to recover by themselves. It's not the government's going to do their piece. But I still see in certain areas, I think we're still lagging behind. I still think that we have to spend more time on figuring out ways that we get women of color back into they're not part of the recovery as I'm seeing it, right? I still see that, flexibility on childcare, flexibility on other pieces as it affects at least some of our workers, as well as the greater ecosystem. I still think we have to put that pressure. I think from a physical standpoint, I see, again, We Rise Together, a great example, and other folks saying, hey, the physical parts of our neighborhoods have to get better. And that level of investment, I can't commend city leaders and foundations and banks and everybody that put it up. But that soft tissue stuff, I still see like that rigor has to stay. We have to spend more time on opportunities for people to like rebound, because it wasn't good before. It got just worse. And now we're at bad, but now we got to get better. So 50-50.
Yeah. Sarah, from where you sit, how are you seeing the recovery?
Thanks, Helene. I say, from the corporate standpoint, economic recovery, the Loop and downtown are very different than across the 77 neighborhoods in the city. And I think, unfortunately, for a long time, until frankly, really the last couple of years, the corporate barometer has really over-indexed progress in the loop for progress in all of Chicago. And I think as I'm speaking with peers and talking to professionals in community engagement and foundations, that conversation has really started to change, which I think I take as a good indicator that there's a really renewed understanding that, Chicago is not a monolith, and we need to be thinking about small business and economic recovery in kind of a neighborhood by neighborhood approach, which I think this work and a lot of the city leadership has highlighted in a way that's important and needs to continue. I also am finding that I think corporate partners are beginning to take actions that are more aligned with understanding that we need to do more than just be job creators. We really need to invest in our employees. We need to be developing real career pathways that lead to strong wages, so that people have money in their pocket to spend in their community and really drive and do business with Stephanie and other small businesses in the neighborhood. And also really realign the idea. I think, supplier diversity has been a talking point for many years with corporate partners, but really understanding what that does when we look at our spend by category, like folks at Westside United and Rush have done. I know it was mentioned earlier. When you realize kind of the size and scale of a corporate budget and what it can do to change small business development in a neighborhood, I think those actions really need to continue in a more consistent way to get us to that real economic recovery, I think, that we'd all like to see. Finally, I'd just say, kind of leaning on a conversation I was part of with the Executives Club a couple of weeks ago, Aisha Jaco made a comment that I really valued from Westside United, which is really that I think this moment in time has shown us that community work isn't a spectator sport. We don't get to, as a corporate partner, show up when it's convenient. We need to roll up our sleeves and ask if we can be at the table in solving some of these kind of longer term concerns that we need to continue to make good progress on. So I guess I'd say overall, I think we're moving at a good pace, but we all need to double down to kind of keep up the tempo.
Let me just ask you, while I have you, you talked a lot about the change that is necessary, but, you work for a very large corporation. These kinds of changes don't happen overnight. And while, I think here in the Chicago region, we've really put a big focus on making sure that the corporate sector also feels engaged in these changes and in these issues. And, Chicago has one of the most engaged corporate communities, I think, of any place in the world. But just talk a bit about what, it's easy to say those things in words. What does it really take to have change happen? And do you feel like it is easy to get the full organization on board to think about what does it mean to have a more inclusive economic recovery and ultimately a more inclusive economy?
I don't think it's easy, especially at large organizations. I think all organizations, like old habits die hard. And I think that, for a long time, the focus was just job creation, and that's still important and can be meaningful. But I think corporations like Amazon and many others are really thinking about, we're in a very different labor market. And if we are going to really be a force for economic change, we need to look beyond entry-level positions and even strong benefits packages and really think about fundamentally, what are we doing to build networks for our employees? I think many corporate partners take for granted that, we're expecting, community energy and growth and development across small businesses without also reinforcing those skill sets in our own team members and giving them the tools to build networks and develop skills that are going to not only support and lead to their growth, but attract other businesses to the community to drive that economic change. So I think we really need to start with our employees and ensure that they're being set up for success. And that does take real changes across HR organizations, across, in some cases, groups that are working on educational benefits, I'll focus just briefly on Amazon, but I think what we realized in the midst of the last couple of years is that we were asking our employees to make a pretty significant commitment before they were eligible for their educational resources. And that needed to change. And it took some time to get that moving, but now all of our entry-level positions are eligible after 90 days of employment for full prepaid tuition, whether that's something that individuals want to participate in for just adding certifications toward their educational pursuits to grow within the business, or if they want to change career paths completely and kind of use Amazon as a springboard to a career in healthcare or construction and building trades, telecom, I'd argue self-supporting cloud computing technology, right? And so I think that work takes time for a company to decide to make that kind of investment. But I think without those kinds of investments, we aren't going to see really that growth and development. I'd say the other thing I'll just briefly mention, and I think this is something that I've been very pleased with in Chicago from a corporate culture standpoint, but I think that, many of us realized that we weren't doing the work needed to ensure that our workforce was supported for long-term success, really in creating environments to support all of the trauma that individuals are dealing with in their day-to-day lives. And so groups like the Chicago Resiliency Network and CARA Collective, I think, are doing some really important work in sitting down with corporate partners who frankly have historically just had the generosity of a strong labor market to fill positions and retain staff. And now they're really doing the work, frankly, to ensure that we're creating work environments where our teams feel heard and they're valued for their lived experiences, and that the skills that they have to bring to the table and frankly inform our tools and programs to attract customers are really going to deliver for them and be successful. So I guess short answer, Helene, it's not easy work, but I think those things around growth and development and supporting our workforce are really starting to see some traction in Chicago, and I think will continue to grow.
Great, thanks. So maybe just moving from you, a large corporation, to talking with Stephanie a little bit from where you sit as a small business. Obviously, ripple effects are so important, and that's part of what we have hoped that the work with We Rise Together can kind of catalyze and create this ripple effect. Stephanie, you've often talked about the broader impact your business will have on the community when you're able to open the expanded production facility and think beyond just a store and really what that will do. So could you share a little bit about your vision for Brown Sugar Bakery and how a local business like yours can be more than just a business, and it can have an impact on the community more broadly?
Well, first, I think, we start, and we started out as a store on 75th Street in the Chatham area, which is a strong community. And as you look at developing people that work at the business and also building relationships with other businesses, the next step is how can you be more impactful with providing career paths? And retail in one location only offers so much. So I think that my next impact will be allowing a path for other folks to mimic, and it's not been easy, the path to actually manufacturing a product, finding other ways to move my product other than on my block. So the manufacturing of a product also gives more jobs. And I used to say I could take you from sweeping the floor to a baker. Now I can say I can take you from sweeping the floor to chief operating officer because of the manufacturing. So that makes a great impact. Additionally, if one more business from 75th Street can start doing that, that's just amazing. And that is my hope, is to impact other minority businesses to know that they can look within their store, see what it is they can create that can then go out to a larger community, whether that's in Chicago or like we're shipping nationally now. So those are the kinds of impacts that are next for us.
Great. And you got a product that is fabulous for anybody who hasn't tried Brown Sugar Bakery. It is a sinful pleasure, what have you. It's great. Anyway, I try not to go there too often, but so Julian, making sure Black and Latinx workers are ready for jobs is really a lot about what Lift Up is all about, and not only jobs, but more broadly thinking about how to strengthen the ecosystem for small businesses. Whether we're at a global corporation, Brown Sugar Bakery, or one of the many other companies represented in our audience, can you talk a bit about what it means in real terms? What do workers today need to do to secure, retain, move forward, have good jobs, and continue to move up? So would just like your thoughts on that.
Sure. And so I think that the way we're approaching this, right, is one of, we're a social enterprise that's a platform that has a for-profit and a nonprofit. And in those ecosystems that we're creating, we're really working to find and get the trust of the employees, right, and meet them where they are, and then find ways that we can provide the right wraparound services to get them to move forward. And within that context, what we're finding is that, we can't demand too much of someone who has 3 jobs, because the cognitive load on how they approach life is very difficult. So I think we take more of that responsibility on ourselves. So our HR department and everyone who works across the company is really thinking about, okay, we need to help that person get to the point where they can start to think about their future, where they want to go, whether it's with us or with someone else, to create the pathways. But we are really, in practical terms, creating ways of that as a business, right? So we'll take, something like liquidity and figure out what, as a company, Lift Up in our 5 businesses, what do we do as a corporate policy to do that? So weekly pay, company sponsored employee loans, 401ks, 529s, and how do we do that? But at the same time, work with our employees to make sure that those are the things that they want. I think that the one thing that we're working hard at is to put our own biases in check of what the employee wants. It's too easy for me to say, oh, well, everyone wants to own a home. It's too easy for me to say, oh, everyone wants to go get a better job. What's more important is really stopping and listening to that employee and saying, where do you want to be? We have plenty of workers that don't want to work more than 10 hours a week because they want to be able to be with their grandkids. I shouldn't force them to do 40 hours a week. And so that very cognizant culture that we're building from within both our nonprofit and the for-profit to provide the right wraparound service at the right time, and to have the employee be there so that they can then, to your point, Helene, be ready to ask for more. That's how we get the retention, and that's how we get them to drive whatever stability is or what mobility is to them, and creating the platform to allow them to do that through the businesses or through the nonprofit.
So since we're talking about recovery, could you just say a bit about, how you think employers need to be thinking about recovery, which is perhaps different than other periods in time, and perhaps it means that the focus on recruitment isn't always the biggest focus versus retaining and growth. But how are you thinking about this issue around recovery that is different than other economic periods?
I mean, I think Sarah alluded to it a little bit, which is, we are in a moment in time when we have to recognize where people are coming from to get to where they are today. On top of that, layering all the social and all the emotional drama and all that other stuff. And so as an employer, I think it's what we're driving very fast, and we're very blessed to be small, is that iterating a lot, Helene, and testing a lot more, investing a little, learning a lot, failing a lot faster, talking to the employees and saying, oh, well, you have a transportation issue. How do we fix that? How do we test that? How do we do this? And then not getting perfection, but getting good enough and getting feedback, and constantly doing the loops about talking to the employees and empowering managers and supervisors to do that work, right? Because We got to go and meet people where they are and then say, if we do this, will you like it? Give them the confidence that, hey, no, that doesn't really help me. I know you think it does, but it doesn't. And so I think now, because there is a tight labor market, because you have people that need to grow and you need to be able to hopefully build your own to go up, the pressure on the company and the corporate policy, your onboarding process, the language you use in every piece of, literature or text message you send to your employees has to have intent, has to come from a good place. But at the same time, I'm dealing with low wage workers, right? And so understanding that mindset, understanding the time compression that's going on in their lives and having sensitivity to it. That's putting a strain. Now we're used to it, that companies like us, and I think like others, are having to retool. We're blessed because we started with that. Our organizing principles, every decision should be made with a dignity lens. That is really tough, really hard to do, but it drives the company and everything we do to ask yourself that question. And we don't spare any department, accounting, finance, HR, operation, you name it. Dignity is, how are we doing that? So that helps us. It also makes it a lot harder, but it's worth the effort.
Yeah, and in the long run, you hope that by taking that approach, the impact is going to be a longer term impact than if you did not. And so, oftentimes it takes longer to do things in a way that is people-centered, community informed, all these things that we talk about. But if they don't, then, I think we continue to have experiences and efforts that don't ever really take root. So yes, takes slower, but seems like it's worth it in the long run.
Yeah, no shortcuts to building power.
Right. That's a good quote. Let me maybe go back to you, Sarah, and also keep you in, Julian. On top of the pandemic, we're also in the midst of other crises, political crises, continued economic issues, inflation, et cetera. How can we stay on track? Do we need to really think about adjusting our approach to economic recovery? Or is it really that we should kind of stay the course even in the midst of some of these issues? Maybe Sarah, just start with you.
Sure. I would say you took the words out of my mouth. We do need to stay the course and not shift focus. I'd say several organizations that I work with, specifically on the West Side in Austin and Garfield Park, where we're building facilities, have already mentioned to me they're concerned supply chain constraints and rises in construction costs are going to start to derail some of the economic impact that they're starting to see. And they're also getting feedback from small business organizations that those constraints are causing people to approach things with more caution. But I think that, we've seen some success in coordinated efforts like We Rise Together and other approaches like the Chicago Corporate Coalition that, while those entities aren't immune from these pressures either, I think having a diverse group of organizations and corporations at the table can kind of help reduce that pressure because, not every business can come to the table maybe with financial resources. As Julian mentioned, my ability to engage as a corporate partner may look very different than Stephanie's as we're, in very different places as organizations, but, Stephanie may be able to bring business insights or consulting services to a community conversation that are just as valuable, if not more valuable than, a corporate funder. So I think really thinking about, every organization, every business partner has an ability to impact kind of a community's capacity to move forward and really thinking about kind of if it isn't a financial resource that a community partner can bring to the table, what are they doing about evaluating their hiring criteria or their employee benefits to really ensure kind of the actions they're taking are still positively impacting recovery, not only for current employees, but for future employees. So I would say, especially, where we are starting to see some movement, not letting us take our foot off the gas, but maybe thinking about, how do we do this work collectively better and continue to keep it centered in the community.
Again, building on Sarah and your point, I look at it like, look, this is difficult work. I go back to Helene, what you said, this is an all hands on deck, but I think that two things need to happen. I think we need to really start to understand that while there is very tangible things that we built a building, we've done this, we've done that, power-oriented solutions need process and they need time to do so. And that building of those processes and power-oriented solutions are things that I think we have to keep front and center. And those things front and center allow for the soft tissue stuff that I like to call to have the time to grow, right? We're not going to do this overnight. Just we build the building and then we've seen time and time again. That's only part of the solution. So, and for me, the building, the supply chain, put grants out are good. And so having the time to be able to work through those processes and work through those practices that help really for the first time in many places, put power back into the community and put power back into small businesses that allow them to grow. And I commend Amazon. Yeah, you guys have to go slower and smaller. And that's really hard work. That's retooling something that's supposed to go fast and big, right? And so, I think that that's where I feel that the front and center and how we talk about it, the narrative that we talk about, the shifting of power and the policies and the practices are really important. And how do you have that? How do you have more small businesses be part of that conversation and recognize where they're at? Because what we want is them to stop the hemorrhaging from these neighborhoods, right? And also be able to get scale, right? Because Amazon needs big companies to supply them. They can't handle hundreds of small ones, right? But at the same time, we need time to get to that. And so I think those are the measures I keep looking at, that how do we do the ebb and flow back and forth to give that breathing room at an accelerated pace, right? Because we all want to recover faster. It's an exciting time.
Yeah, so you've mentioned several times the notion of power and building power, which is really, in many ways, how do you make sure that the community and community voice is part of this recovery process? So I would love to hear people's thoughts, and maybe Stephanie, we can start with you, on how can we really ensure that community goals are central to how we're looking at recovery and how we're prioritizing the work that is necessary for an equitable recovery. How do we actually include the voices of community in a way that are meaningful? And please feel free to use examples from your own experiences. I'll start with you, Stephanie.
Well, I think that, it's important that we're at the table. I can say that, Sarah, you have Aisha Jaco in your ear. That is a voice that is very tied to the community and more than just the West Side community. It's organizations like that that communicate with people like me and ask me what my thoughts are on what's coming up and how can they be of help and what do we want to see. And similarly, as Julian spoke about how they are empowering employees, it is imperative that small businesses are empowered in similar ways. A small business like myself, the problems that you have in developing employees, those are the problems that I face as a developing business. All of the processes that need to happen. And then I have to turn around and bring the employees into that I have to recruit, maintain. So I think that the main thing is if everyone can stay focused on that this is important work, that small businesses matter and keep us at the table. Like Julian said, don't assume what it is you think is important to us, but include us in the conversation. I think that would be the biggest thing. And I have seen examples of the city of Chicago and other corporations actually coming and saying, what do you think about this? And that's new. And I think that that's new since COVID. I've never had that previous of COVID.
Sarah, any comments on that? It'd be wonderful to hear how you, again, as representing a large corporation, how are you thinking about incorporating the voices of community in the work that you do?
No, and I think one thing Stephanie shared as large as we are, we're only as strong as the small business providers that are on our network. So you may not think of this normally, but 60% of the products that are sold on Amazon are sold by small business owners and minority business owners. And customers are demanding that, right? If I want to be an attractive business partner, I need to cultivate businesses like Stephanie's to want to sell on our platforms. And I'm not unique in that. Shift, some of, many other organizations are kind of trying to figure out how do we attract and retain small businesses to want to use us as one of hopefully many conduits to get their products out to market. Because if you've eaten any of Stephanie's delightful treats, that there's probably few people that wouldn't want to enjoy them if they, can, one, meet that capacity for demand and also get it out in a way that's economically viable for her. So I think there is, renewed awareness of the fact that I think many of the ways consumers purchase goods and look for goods changed over the last 2 years during the pandemic. So really being able to think about not only the jobs for the small business owner, but the resources and tools that they need to strengthen their sales, right? Marketing and advertising and things that, aren't intuitive necessarily for e-commerce. When you open your business, that might not be central to your strategy, but it's becoming more and more important as we want to make sure that, Stephanie's consumer base and many other small businesses' consumer base are far beyond Chicago. So, I think Amazon specifically is very interested in that voice, and we're trying to create tools for small business owners to find working with us more attractive, whether that's credits for advertising or mentorship and coaching for how to reach our customers. But I think it's got to be more than that. I think to Stephanie's point, it needs to be about, what are some of the other tools that a corporate partner like us can bring to the small business community? And really, whether it's, training or, small business grants or other tools that are, going to continue to strengthen that dynamic, right? We're stronger and better if there are lots of small businesses in Chicago who want to consider doing business with us. So I think, not being short-sighted about the importance of strong small business for the success of our own business, and frankly, the stickiness of our employees. They're going to want to stay and live in communities where they have a wonderful neighborhood coffee shop and they have, the ability to enjoy time out with their families in their neighborhood, right? So I think we've got to think as corporate partners beyond some of those business relationships and really think about, what is changing the community dynamic take and what's our role in that. So I look forward to, hopefully taking this conversation with Stephanie offline and continuing
Definitely.
to think about, ways that not only Amazon, but other corporate partners in the city can really learn from her and her team's experience.
That's great. Let me just, Julian, were you trying to say something?
Yeah, just real quick, the way I would land that plane for us and the way you said that, it's from both of you, is there's you can look at scheduling, for big companies or small companies. We institute something called, I know it's a fancy word, grace. We know that a lot of our low wage workers have a hard time getting to work because of transportation. Giving a single mother or a father 15-minute grace period to make sure they get to work on time because they can drop off a child, that's a corporate policy, right? That we're instituting. We don't even think about it. We don't call it, hey, listen, we're instituting fault tolerant design to our scheduling. That's the technical term. The real term is it's grace. But that little bit of grace that allows that mother those moments of time with her daughter or her son to be a parent and not have to worry about getting fired or have retaliation when they get back to work, over time, create a culture and someone who wants to stay. And it's not hard, but it takes a mindset. So that's the kind of stuff we'll take these big terms and they, all right, what's the real reason? What do you really do with that? And that's just, as I heard that, I'm like, most of these people do it, but it's easy for any small business to think about grace and scheduling. So I just wanted to add that. That's it.
Yeah. No, thank you. And we don't always talk about grace as part of what we think about in terms of business, but I think it's a very apt focus and concept. I'm going to ask maybe one more question. Then I see we have some questions that have come in from the audience. My last question kind of touches on one of those, but just to go back to We Rise Together and what we're trying to accomplish. So as you know, it's committed to accelerating equitable economic recovery over the next 4 years, and would love to get from your perspective what you think is the single most important thing that an effort like ours, that is a coalition of private sector, public sector, philanthropic funders, community organizations, all working together, what do you think is the most important thing that we can do to really bend that curve and within that relatively short time frame? And particularly from your different vantage points, what would you like to most see and make sure that we do over the next few years to really be able to accelerate the economic recovery from a lens of equity?
I would like to, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, Stephanie. No.
I just wanted to say that I think that what has really stood out for me about the We Rise is the fact that We Rise isn't necessarily a grant that you go after, but they have taken the time to work with the community and really look out at what they feel will be impactful and make the reach, right? I think to be reached for is a total different level. When you're reached for, although it still was a competitive grant, it just gives you a lot of, and I know this word is kind of trite, but hope. And I think that around these processes, if business owners can have hope, it's important. There's so many things that come at you. There's so many bars that have to be met and so many that you miss. So when there is that extra step of we are looking at what the community wants, and if you've done your work in the community, you come up, I think it just really lends to businesses having hope. I mean, I've looked out at some of the other grantees. I know many of them, and I think that they are all positive people and impactful people. That's not always the case with other grants that are more random in their approach. So I think their approach is really, really important, and I think that you're going to see a difference because of it.
I'll weigh in. I think that when I hear about We Rise Together, I think that a doubling down on merchandising the work, merchandising the type of conversations, Helene, that you and Gloria have been able to put together, and to talk about the connective tissue that is being built, and that should be normal, and having people understand that you can do a panel with big, small, and there's a common urgency is really important. Because I go to parts of the community that they're not into it. They're like, what? I don't know about that. So I think for me, it's how can you accelerate the merchandising of the work that you guys are doing. For me, is single-handedly the most important thing to bend the curve. There's people that still are ignoring it or don't believe they have to do anything. To be honest, I don't have to do anything. I'm good.
Yeah. Sarah, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd say, to me, it goes back to what Julian said earlier today, and that's, kind of shifting the power. I think that one of the things I've appreciated about this approach as a funder, and I've had the good grace of being able to be in this seat for other corporations in Chicago for many years. But I think often corporate funders are hearing about and seeing projects, frankly, because they've got a big brand behind them, or someone who's kind of the loudest voice in the room is the project lead. And I think this, at least in my experience so far, has shifted that and really made these projects about working of the community, not for the community. No neighborhood needs me to come in with my plan that I built in a downtown office building to implement in their neighborhood. They need to sit down and listen. And I think the framework that is being established is shifting that power dynamic. And I think that's something that I welcome as a funder, because they're going to be sustainable and owned differently because they're coming from owners and leaders in the neighborhood who are thinking about, how do I, drive foot traffic, and what am I going to do to ensure my workforce is successful, and all of these things that a funder isn't going to walk into the neighborhood with that knowledge base. So I think that's, to me, one of the biggest shifts that I welcome. And I think also this willingness to continue to take the temperature, to say, hey, we're going to make mistakes. We Rise is going to do some really great work, but they're going to, make some errors too, right? All of us do. And I think being able to have that candid trust with the neighborhood leaders and business owners to say, hey, this didn't land well. What did we get wrong? How do we do that differently next time? And I think sometimes there's so much finality with these kinds of grants and contributions that when and we've all been to that show before, right, where it doesn't land well, and rather than address it, learn from it, we just kind of shift topics. And I think this provides us with a framework to do the hard work, and really do the due diligence when things go well, and figure out, then great, how do we scale? And when they don't go well, like, what are we taking active steps to course correct? And how do we get it right next time? So I think that's what I'm looking forward to as this work continues. And I think also, getting to meet really thoughtful, talented people who have a vision for their neighborhood and for how that neighborhood can attribute to all of Chicago's success is important to me.
Great, thanks. And that kind of answered one of the questions that came in, which was really, what are the opportunities for the different sectors to come together to work towards a more inclusive recovery? And I think you all have touched on that. Let me just ask another question that came in, and I'll reframe it just slightly, but it really is focused on this issue of leveraging supplier diversity. And you raised that in your comments, Sarah. So from each of your perspectives, could you say a bit about how you see supplier diversity? And, this term has been around for a long time. We've called it different things. But why is it so difficult? What are some of the stumbling blocks? And how have you, from your different perspectives, been able to, in some ways, further the goal of having more diverse suppliers? And I'm happy to start with you, Sarah.
I can jump in. I've had the good fortune, I think, to Stephanie saying, to be surrounded by people smarter than me in this space. And I think that, as a business, there's been a lot of, misconnect on how do we really make impact. And part of it is, ensuring that we understand, what are all of the business opportunities, and not kind of only focusing on one category that seems easy. I think, especially as I talk to other businesses, sometimes there's kind of an over indexing towards, services that seem that'll be easy to secure diverse suppliers in, or certified suppliers in, when those areas don't always move the needle much on economic impact. And so thinking holistically about, all of your spend, and really setting targeted goals that, that you can measure against. But I think also being very consistent about evaluating, your RFP process and your timeline for available spend, and being candid with suppliers. I think a lot of businesses spend a lot of time and energy chasing RFPs or registering on companies' systems that feel like they just fall into a black hole. So that's doesn't do anybody any favors, because no one has enough time. So I think, being very thoughtful as a business partner, like I think I'm seeing more organizations do, and saying, hey, here are the 4 opportunities I have in the month of August. Let's sit down now and talk about how you can approach this from a business lens, and making sure that that process is transparent. So I think that's a big part of it to me. And I think also helping businesses, get past some of the barriers that have kept them from pursuing these opportunities. I think, as you're a small business owner and your time is tight, going through kind of a cumbersome process to put yourself in the running for something sometimes is just, too much to handle. So I think this goes back to kind of the HR policies and other policies that we all can do. Are we creating roadblocks or are we solving problems, right? And I think, we've gotten so process heavy with a lot of our corporate structures that, it just seems easier to leave it alone. Well, if we leave it alone, we're not going to make any impact. So I think questioning those processes and really being more direct about what are barriers that are preventing businesses from getting in the mix.
Maybe Stephanie, from the perspective of a small business, wanting to expand, wanting to build scope, how have you seen the challenges of supplier diversity from your side?
Wow, that's a question that spans 30 years for me, and it's real. I think that Sarah is so correct about a lot of businesses going for the low-hanging fruit, if you will, for services that they think will be easily acquired. It's tough. As a small business, we are in the process of always looking to be, if you will, easy to deal with. I have a team member that looks at making sure that we're in position to be responsive. And that's not always easy. I'm able to do that now. 5 years ago, I was not able to do that. So I missed a lot of opportunities just because I didn't have the bandwidth to respond. I would absolutely love the opportunity to somehow be more impactful in talking with corporations about how to make it easier for small businesses, because you immediately think, because we cannot jump this particular hurdle, that we might not be able to respond. I have cake. I have it. I can produce cake. I may not be able to produce the paperwork and go through that process as timely as the corporation might want, but ultimately I may be able to produce. So I do think that some of the processes definitely need to be evaluated. And I'll give you one. Recently, I became minority certified. I will tell you that was a tough process for me, and it was a frustrating process because I cannot get any more minority than I am. I cannot be located in a more minority neighborhood. I cannot have a more minority staff. I just cannot. And so to have to go through that process and constantly have it pushed back, it was difficult. I do have some things to say about, being a 20-year-old business and last year 19 years old when we were certified and needing to come up with the first check that was deposited in a bank account 19 years ago that I did not have. I didn't have a bank account for Brown Sugar Bakery until the 4th year of business. And these are some of the realities that we just take for granted. And those are stumbling blocks. Now, at year 19, I was able to push through that stumbling block and really, over these years, develop enough savvy to push back and say, hey, we've got to do something else about this. But at year 4, I did not have that savvy and I quit. And that's unfortunate. I don't want to see that happen to other businesses at year 2, 3, and 4 that are still trying to get strong enough to deal with those kinds of barriers.
So as always, these conversations fly by, and I see we are at end of time. And we had a question about how to get more attention on the West Side, and I think we have tried to We Rise Together to put a real priority on, the areas that had the greatest harm economically as well as health-wise from the pandemic, of which West Side is one. We'll continue to try to make sure that we're getting to good West Side organizations. So thank you for noting that. And we will continue to make sure that we are working with all the communities where we want to see the approach to an equitable recovery. So I know that there's more you all could have said. You were a wonderful panel and really brought such wonderful insights into this discussion. I always leave feeling more energized. And somebody talked about hope. I guess it was you, Stephanie. It does leave me with hope when we have people like yourselves from all different perspectives really thinking about how we do this and how we do it differently this time, so that 4 years from now, 5 years from now, we really will look back and be proud of the fact that the philanthropic, the business, the public sector, nonprofit communities came together to say, Chicago needs to recover from this crisis in an equitable fashion and hopefully continue to lead the path towards an inclusive economy for all that works for all. So thank you all very much. It's been my pleasure, and we will see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.